Dick Van Dyke told us about the 6 evil actors of all time. People in Hollywood really like Dick Van Dyke. He has been making movies and television shows for over 70 years. Dick Van Dyke is a guy and people trust him. This is what makes what he says about the people in Hollywood so surprising. Dick Van Dyke knew these actors very well. He saw them when they were not acting for the public. A person who used to work with him said this. Dick Van Dyke saw the actors, not the fake people they pretend to be when everyone is watching. The things that he saw really bothered him. What he witnessed was very upsetting to him. He saw some things that deeply disturbed him. These revelations are really interesting because they show us the difference between what people seem to be like in public and what they are really like in private. The actors we love to watch, the comedians who make us laugh, and the people we think of as role models often turn out to be completely different when they're not in the public eye. Sometimes they can be mean, hurtful, and even abusive. A person who studies culture said Hollywood is very good at making people look good, and that is really true. The people we see on television, like the actors and the funny comedians, are often not what they seem to be. Hollywood and these revelations about Hollywood are very interesting to think about. Van Dyke's perspective is really something because he always did what was right throughout his career. He could see when the difference between how people appeared and how they were was not just about selling something, but about hiding something really bad. Behavior that actually hurt people. In the parts that follow, we take a look at 6 famous actors that Van Dyke said were especially problematic. These actors were not famous people who got angry sometimes, but people who did things that had a lasting bad effect on those who were unlucky enough to be around them. Number 1, Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis is a person who people think is funny. The other side of Jerry Lewis is not funny at all. It is very different from how Jerry Lewis acted in his movies and television shows in the 1950s and 1960s. Jerry Lewis was really good at making people laugh with his faces and lots of energy. He seemed like a person when Jerry Lewis was acting. When the cameras were not rolling, Jerry Lewis was not a nice person. He planned everything he did carefully. Jerry Lewis wanted everyone around him to do things right, which made people feel like they were walking on eggshells around Jerry Lewis. The people who worked with him, the women, had to deal with his mean words and sudden anger a lot. Van Dyke was really surprised by how different Lewis was in public and in private. Lewis did some things like helping the Muscular Dystrophy Association, but he made the people on set very scared and unhappy. The historian thought that Lewis was often cruel, for the sake of being cruel. He wanted to hurt people's feelings, and that was his main goal, not just something that happened when he was trying to make things perfect. Number 2, Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was a deal. He was an athletic guy. Errol Flynn became the action hero in Hollywood during the 1930s and early 1940s. He starred in movies like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. People thought Errol Flynn was a guy who played it safe, but really Errol Flynn did some bad things. There were allegations of sexual assault against Errol Flynn, including some big trials for statutory rape. These things hurt Errol Flynn's life. Someone named Van Dyke said that Errol Flynn was like poison in a suit. This meant that Errol Flynn's charm made him more dangerous. Errol Flynn was a guy. The way Errol Flynn treated women is not good. But that is not all. Errol Flynn also had feelings for the Nazi Party. This is very surprising because Errol Flynn played heroes in movies. Errol Flynn died when he was 50 years old. The bad things he did to people stayed with them, and that is what people remember most about Errol Flynn. Number 3, Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby was a singer who seemed like a nice guy. At home, he was actually very mean and liked to be in charge. A lot of people in America loved listening to his voice because it made them feel happy and think of holidays. However, his own sons said that when they were kids they got hurt a lot by him, and he was not very nice to them. He even used belts with metal studs and straps to punish them, which is very scary. This is not what people thought he was like because, in public, he acted like a father figure. When he was working, Bing Crosby expected everything to be perfect. If someone did not do something right, he would get very cold and dismissive toward them. Bing Crosby was like this, with the people he worked with. Van DJK really loved his family, was very kind to his own kids. So when he found out about Crosby, it was very upsetting for Van DJK. Crosby was a singer, people loved him for singing White Christmas. It was shocking to see how cruel he was to his own children. This showed Van DJK that bad people can seem nice and talented, but really, they are not. Van DJK thought this was very sad because Crosby had a voice, but he was not a nice person to his own kids. Number 4. Wallace Beery. Wallace Beery was a guy who was really tough, but also very kind. Back in the 1930s and early 1940s, people loved watching Wallace Beery in movies because he was very good at playing the part of a man who seems mean, but is actually very nice. Wallace Beery was great at acting like a guy with a heart of gold. He did a job in movies like The Champ and Min and Bill. These movies were so good that Wallace Beery got recognized by the Academy Awards. When you watched Wallace Beery in a movie, he seemed like a lovable guy who was a little rough around the edges, but deep down he was a very decent person. Wallace Beery was really good at making people believe this. Behind the scenes, he was really scary to a lot of people in Hollywood. The thing is, Wallace Beery had a bad temper, he said some very racist things, and he was also very violent. This made him very dangerous to the people who had to work with Wallace Beery. Someone named Van DJK said something about Wallace Beery that was very true. Van DJK said Wallace Beery did not have to act to play a guy, because that is what he was really like. This is interesting because when you see Wallace Beery in movies, he is playing a character that's actually the opposite of who he really was. The bad stories about Beery are about something that happened a long time ago in Hollywood. People say Beery was involved in the death of a comedian named Ted Healy, who created the Three Stooges. Apparently Beery was with a group of people who hurt Ted Healy badly outside the Trocadero nightclub back in 1937. Ted Healy got bad injuries, and he died a few days later. Some people think that the people in charge at MGM helped cover up what Beery did. They never proved that Beery was guilty. A lot of people in the business thought that he was involved in Ted Healy's death. Beery and the people at MGM never admitted to anything. The story about Ted Healy's death has stuck with Beery for a long time. The incident might have happened the way people are talking about it, or it might not have. But one thing is, for sure it shows that Beery's behavior was often violent and scary. A lot of people who worked with him say that Beery would hit the crew members, scare his co-stars, and use his size. He was over 6 feet tall and weighed around 250 pounds. To threaten anyone who did not agree with Beery. Beery's violence was a problem, and Beery's behavior was very intimidating. Beery was a mean guy. He was racist too. He did not want to work with people who were performing or helping out on set. He would say words about them right out in the open. What really bothered people like Van DJK was that Beery was not mean. Sometimes he was mean all the time. He thought some people were not as good as him. Beery was not an actor. He was just okay. He had some ideas, but he was not very talented. Some people can be mean. They are so good at what they do that people put up with it. That was not the case with Beery. Beery's behavior was not about losing his temper. It was about how he really felt about black people and other people he did not like. The fact that Wallace Beery kept his job and got paid a lot of money was because studio head Louis B. Mayer liked Wallace Beery's guy image. Wallace Beery played characters that people liked in his movies. In real life, Wallace Beery was actually very mean. This is a problem in Hollywood, where people like Wallace Beery can seem one way on screen, but be totally different in real life. The difference between the characters Wallace Beery played and what Wallace Beery was really like is one of the surprising things about Hollywood, where things are not always what they seem. Number 5. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy was a great actor, but he had a big problem with drinking too much. People think of Spencer Tracy as one of the actors in Hollywood. He was very good at acting, which is why he was nominated for Academy Awards 9 times and won 2 of them in a row. When you saw him in movies, he seemed like a person who did the right thing and thought about how his actions would affect others. He also seemed like a man who knew how to be a man without being mean or aggressive. When he was not acting, Spencer Tracy had a big problem with alcohol that made him do some very bad things, especially to women. The woman he was with, for a time Katharine Hepburn, and the people who ran the movie studios tried to keep this secret from the public. Van Dyke saw Tracy's behavior for himself at industry events. Tracy was a guy. When he was not drinking, he could be really charming and smart. But when Tracy drank alcohol, it completely changed him. He became someone who would get into fights and say really mean things to people. Van Dyke saw that Tracy was a person when he was drinking, and that was really scary. Tracy was a mean drunk. He often hurt women, including Hepburn. People in Hollywood would just say that he was like that because he drank much instead of saying that he was being abusive. Van Dyke and some other people did not like that everyone thought Tracy was an actor, so they would forgive him for being violent. It was really strange that Tracy could play characters who stood up for what was right in movies like Day at Black Rock and Inherit the Wind, but he did not do the right thing in his own life. Tracy's behavior was very bad. It is not okay to hurt people just because you are drunk. The way Tracy acted in movies was very different from how he acted at home. That is a big problem. Tracy's drinking was not an excuse for his behavior. Tracy's personal life was really complicated because he was having a long-term affair with Hepburn. He was still married to his wife. The movie studio wanted people to think he was a good guy, so they just pretended that everything was fine. Number 6. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was a big star in Hollywood's golden age. He was amazing at playing guys with lots of feelings in movies like Spartacus, Paths of Glory, and Champion. Kirk Douglas was not afraid to talk about things that people did not want to talk about. He helped writers who were not allowed to work. This made people think he was very brave. Kirk Douglas also did some bad things that hurt people, especially young actresses who worked with him. Kirk Douglas had an impact on people, and people are still talking about the things he did. Van Dyke said something in private that's really bad. He said, "You would not want your daughter with Douglas." This shows that Van Dyke thinks Douglas is a bad person who does very bad things to people. Van Dyke is talking about the things that Douglas has supposedly done to people. Douglas is in trouble because of something that happened a time ago. People are talking about an incident with Natalie Wood when she was 16 years old. This happened during an audition in the 1950s. Now people are saying that Douglas was involved in this incident. Other women have come forward, said that Douglas used his power to get what he wanted from them. He would intimidate them, use the movie studio to protect himself. Douglas was a star, and that is why people did not complain about him. The studio would pay people to keep quiet or promise them jobs if they did not say anything. Sometimes they would just scare them into keeping quiet. Douglas is the one who did these things, and people are finally talking about it. Van Dyke was really upset by the difference between what Douglas said he believed in and what he actually did. Douglas talked about doing what is right in public. People said he took advantage of women who could not protect themselves. The characters Van Dyke saw Douglas play on screen, like men who fight against people in power who are not fair, were very different from the things Douglas did when no one was watching. Van Dyke saw Douglas as a man who played heroes. Douglas did not act like a hero in his private life.